Hello everyone, welcome to another Shmup review video. Today's subject was selected by the patrons in the monthly Patreon voted review, so shoutouts to everyone who supports the channel. It means a lot, and I'm really excited because there's some serious serendipity going on because not that long ago I released my greatest shmups of all time list, and included on that list was this game, and I was saying, oh, perfect, now I have a chance to spend a little bit more time talking about why this game made it on that list and why I think it is so awesome. So Cho Ren Sha 68K, let's talk about the history here. So this was originally developed for the Sharp 68K computer, that's where the name 68K comes from, which was an old school computer system. From what I am reading, was very powerful for its time and sort of competed with IBM as a machine of the future, but unfortunately the Sharp wasn't able to hold up in the long run. But while it was still kicking and while it was still relevant, a great number of really impressive games were developed for it, and premier of them is Cho Ren Sha. So Cho Ren Sha is a Dojin shmup, and I remember when I first joined the shmup community and referred to games as Dojin games, I got some people snickering at me because I guess people associate that with X-rated material, but I was like, no, wait, no. That's what they call indie shmups in Japan, right? And I guess to some degree, maybe some of them are X-rated, some of them are not. This game is not, and that may disappoint you, but what's really great about it is it was developed in 1995, and that sort of blows my mind because when you take a trip back in memory lane, you look at what games were being made during 1995. Donpachi came out in 1995. Dodonpachi came out in 1997. So this game, despite its presentation and despite the sort of feel of it being a bit more modern, a bit more fresh compared to those games as far as it being on a PC and all that sort of thing, it actually predates them, which is pretty crazy if you think about it. So what happened was it came out on the Sharp in 1995, and then eventually it made its way onto the Windows in the year 2001. And the thing about the Windows port is you can still get it, you can still play it. It's been updated so you can play it on Windows 10. I'll have a link in the video description. This game is entirely free, by the way, which is really cool and kind of sad in a way because you feel like the developer should probably have made some money at some point on this game. Maybe he did, but as of right now, it's 100% totally legally free to download. And one thing to keep note of is if you go ahead and play it, it's actually pretty straightforward. You just launch the exe and there it goes. But there's some notes I want to give you, some hints, some advice that may make the experience a little bit easier for you. First of all, this game does not have a built-in auto-fire function that I can find. I looked around in the menu section and the menus were a little bit confusing and strange, and honestly I don't know how they work and what they do, so I left them well enough alone. Instead what I did was I used just a built-in auto-fire on my arcade stick, or you can use something like anti-micro and bind it to a key and then toggle auto-fire on that key. In any case, I definitely recommend using auto-fire because sitting and hammering the fire button, it's what's going to be 50 or more minutes, is going to be a nightmare, so go ahead and do that. The control scheme in the game is very simple. You have your bomb, you have your fire, just make sure to put auto-fire on there. And then as far as getting it running, another hint is that if you want to capture the game, or if you want to stream the game, you're going to need to play it in windowed mode because at first I tried to capture, at least from what I've been able to do, I tried to capture an OBS and I did a full playthrough and got all the footage and I was feeling really good about myself. Then I went ahead and looked at my OBS capture and I was capturing it, you know, full screen and everything. And it was just this tiny little thumbnail sized video. And so I tried to expand it and it looked like garbage, so I had to redo it. So what I did is I had to download this external program and then run the exe within the program, and that launches it in Windows mode and you can play around with the Windows size and everything like that. I'd recommend that. I was reading in forums and things like that, and it doesn't sound like it adds input lag. Personally, I feel like if you're going to just play the game, play it full screen normally, but if you need to capture it or stream it, this looks like the way you need to do it unless you get creative with it and have like an external capture card or a second PC or, you know, something like that. But in any case, that's my advice as far as getting the game running, but it's actually pretty easy, all things considered, it being developed in 2001. So now let's talk about the overall design and feel of the game and what I would compare it to. I feel like when I was playing this game, and it also makes sense, again, released in 1995, so at first I was going to be like, oh, maybe Donpachi or Dodonpachi influenced this or that section, then you had to stop and think, wait, no, this game is actually older than those games, so that's not possible. Instead, the game that it seems to remind me the most of which makes sense, is Batsugun. And I feel like Toplan definitely had a lot of influence on this game's design as far as the boss design, the level design, the sort of fast-paced bullets where it's not quite bullet hell as we know it today, but it's that proto bullet hell, again, very much like Batsugun, where there's a nice amount of stuff on screen, but it's got some speed, it's got some legs under it. It's not going to be as slow as something like a Toho game or something along those lines. Very, very cool. I think it's that nice middle ground for all the players out there where if you're into bullet hell, you're going to like it. If you're into classic style shmups, you're going to like it. It's hitting that nice midpoint between the both where pretty much everyone I think is going to like it. It is a pretty challenging game as far as overall difficulty. I wanted to comment on that a little bit. I wouldn't say it's harder than Dodonpachi, at least from what I was able to gather, but it was definitely harder than Batsugun, at least the arcade mode of Batsugun, especially since it has 2 loops. The boss fights in the game are no joke, especially the last 2 boss fights. I came very close to getting it 1-all. I was just on the last boss fight, but I didn't feel like redoing the footage a 3rd time, so I basically got to the last boss in the first loop, died, and it has a continue system, speaking of dying, so that you can restart the stage. I didn't see any sort of stage select system in there, which is a little bit unfortunate, but again, since this is a game from 1995, and it's basically just a port onto the PC, I don't think there's been any sort of added features since the original release. I mean, I could be wrong about that, but unfortunately there is no stage select that I could find. However, you can sort of fudge it a little bit, where what you can do is, how I practiced was when you got to stage 5 and it got real challenging, if I'd make a mistake, I would just kill myself and then use the continue and restart from stage 5. The problem with that is you don't restart with your power up, so you got to re-power up, so it throws off your routing and everything if you're going for score. And really, if you're playing this game for score, maybe there's some sort of cheat engine or save state functionality you can get to work in there in some way. I don't think it's totally impossible. I guess if you emulated the Sharp version, I have no idea, but from what I'm able to gather, I'm not sure if save states or stage select are possible, but I wouldn't be surprised considering how old the game is and all the methods on PC you can do to manipulate games and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, now let's talk specifically about what is going on in this game. The first thing that really stood out to me, and I think will stand out to a lot of players, is the power-up system. And so the power-up system will be very familiar to the players of another game called Crimson Clover. And so again, you can see this game influencing games that came after it. Like I remember in my interview with the Zero Ranger devs, they referenced this game as a big influence on them. And then also you can see with Crimson Clover, the power-up system is basically directly taken from this game with some modifications. But the way it works is when you kill certain enemies, you know, carrier enemies, they drop power-ups. So they drop a shot power-up, they drop a bomb upgrade, and then they drop a shield, which is pretty cool. And the thing about it is, if you're really swag and you're really good with your routing and very precise with your placement, because it's actually not that easy, and you sit in the middle of the 3 power-ups for about a second or 2, they'll start to spin around you, and then you'll collect all 3. However, what I ended up doing, because I wasn't that precise and I wasn't that well routed, and it's actually way more challenging than it looks, I ended up just sort of strategically picking the power-ups and sort of doing it that way. But as far as going for ideal scoring and going for the ideal play, if you're able to sit yourself in between them and collect all 3, that is the way to go. It's an interesting sort of risk reward too, because let's say you really need a shield upgrade or you really need a shot upgrade, and yet you go for it and you accidentally collect a bomb upgrade and you already are full bombs. You can see how you can basically lose out. So it is a cool risk reward system as far as the power-ups go. And that ties into the scoring as well. From what I'm able to gather, there wasn't a whole lot of info on the game's scoring and how to score it optimally or anything like that. I dug around a bit. I'm sure somewhere out there there's some comprehensive guide that I'm missing. But the basic idea is, again, very similar to Batsugun and Hoplan style games where you kill enemies, milk bosses, that's way to score, and then collect power-ups, and then also end stage bonuses. And from what I understand, the way the end stage bonuses work is the more crap you have, the bigger your bonus. So basically, if you're fully upgraded with your power-ups, you're fully upgraded with your shield, and you're fully upgraded with your bombs, you get more points. Kind of like Ketsui, how Ketsui does that with the bombs and extends and everything like that. Also on the power-ups, before I forget, I believe it's every 1,000,000 points, it replaces I don't know, I think the shield power-up. It replaces one of the power-ups with a 1-up. So again, another risk reward where you can maybe go directly for that 1-up, or if you're feeling real ballsy, try and get in the middle and collect all 3. But that's the way the extend system works in the game. It's tied to every million points. I've been watching some gameplay. I watched Jamer's run and some other runs. There actually isn't a whole lot of gameplay of this game out there, probably because it's so hard to capture and all that sort of thing. But I wasn't able to see anything that I found to be all that broken. Whereas in Batsugun, there's a whole exploit you can do on one of the bosses that basically breaks the scoring system. I didn't see anything like that as far as what I was watched of Cho Ren Sha, but who knows, maybe on stage 2-5, and I just didn't watch that far in the video that happens. Speaking of the loops, once you get past the first loop, and the game's actually 7 stages, so it's quite a long one. This reminds me a bit of Truxton 2 or Tatsujin, I think that's how you say it in Japanese, where the game just goes on and on. The thing about this though is this bad boy has 2 loops, so even after you get through the first loop, you gotta go back through again, which has suicide bullets, I believe, or extra bullets, and then once you get through the second loop, then you fight the TLBs. So doing a full run of this game is no joke. This is not a walk in the park. And for whatever reason, the game, besides reminding me of Batsugun, it also reminded me a little bit of Batrider. Those are the 2 games that came to mind when I was playing it. Maybe it's the way the shot worked, and maybe it's the way the enemy sprites look, but everything considered, I feel like if you took Batsugun and Batrider and you stuck them together, I don't think they'd be too far off from Cho Ren Sha. So that's pretty much everything to do with the scoring and power-ups that I can think of. So let's talk about the overall level design, because that I found was very interesting. What distinguishes Cho Ren Sha from something like a Dodonpachi, in my opinion, is it's much more focused on larger enemy formations and larger enemies, almost mid-boss feeling enemies at times, where Dodonpachi in cave games typically have a lot more popcorn enemies, a lot more low-powered enemies but in higher numbers, sort of spewing waves of bullets at you. The way Cho Ren Sha works, and this is what kind of reminds me of older games, is that it spawns these bigger enemies that have multi-phase attacks on you. So they'll come into the screen and they'll launch this giant whip of bullets, and then they have these spreads. Actually, when I was playing this game, I'm also working on a shmup of my own as of late. I don't know if I've mentioned that on the public channel or not yet, but I was heavily inspired by one of the enemies in Cho Ren Sha, where I was sitting and thinking, I need a kind of bigger enemy that comes on the screen and dominates the screen. And then there was this enemy in Cho Ren Sha. It comes in with this giant whip attack, and then it does these spread fires. I basically was like, that's what I'm looking for. So I was directly inspired by an enemy of this game to include in my own game. Anyway, another part about the level design that I think people will obviously notice is the backgrounds of the game. So the background of the game is really cool, but it's basically the same background throughout all the stages except the final stage. In stage 7, or stage 0 as the game calls it, the background gets damaged, and this is when the game knows, okay, now it's serious mode time. Whenever you have damaged backgrounds and shmups, that means you're in for a hell of a time. And yeah, Cho Ren Sha definitely delivers there. I'm curious why there is not multiple backgrounds. I wonder if it was a limitation of the hardware. I'll give it the benefit of the doubt and say maybe that sharp 68K computer just couldn't handle that many backgrounds, or maybe his development history was just really rushed and he didn't have time to make backgrounds, because the overall graphical presentation of the game I think is very excellent. As far as the ships, as far as the enemies, it looks very professional. It looks like, and I imagine this guy must have worked for a main studio. I guess if I was a better YouTuber, I could have researched a bit more about his personal history. I feel very confident saying that this guy must have worked for Toplan or Cave or some shmup studio at some point, because the guy solo developed everything, and the sprites look amazing, the gameplay is awesome. The music, I don't know if he did the music, I'm assuming he did. The music is also very, very good. I'll talk a little bit more about the music in a second here, but back on the graphical presentation, I really love how saturated the bullets are, how cyberpunk, and like it has this real visceral feel to it as far as sharp edges, things are pointy and they hurt you. I like that sort of visual design. I'm a big fan of it. The biggest flaw of the visual design, I don't think anyone would argue, is just the lack of backgrounds, where they could have maybe thrown in, they didn't have to do all the stages uniquely, but maybe had sets of 2. So the first 2 stages look like the default, or the next 2 stages have another scheme of some kind, and then the final stages have another scheme of some time, and then the damage scheme at the end. I think that would have been nice, but again, I don't know if it was a limitation of the hardware. I don't know if the guy just didn't have enough time. Who knows? But effective nonetheless. The only problem with the lack of stage backgrounds is that it can be kind of challenging to remember what stage is what until you really get familiar with the patterns, because the patterns are also not super distinctive from one another. Now, the patterns themselves are distinctive because the enemy types are pretty unique, but they're not as distinctive as you get in something like a cave where you go into stage 5 in Dodonpachi and you're just assaulted by tanks the entire time. So you're like, ah, this is the tank stage. Or you go to stage 6 and you're in these weird bee honeycombs and there's Glitcho and all the bee enemies flying around and the little turrets that spawn out of the honeycombs, and you're like, ah, yes, this is the random bee enemy stage. You know, Dodonpachi and cave games are very good about that sort of thing. Cho Ren Sha, it feels a little bit more mix and mashed where some of the enemies sort of blend together. So until you really get an idea of what the stages are like, you can actually pretty easily confuse which stage is which, and oh, did this enemy spawn in this stage or that stage? For instance, when I was trying to find the enemy that does the whip and the flying attack, I had to just fast forward in sections until I found the section. I think it was in stage 3. But yes, let's end by talking about the boss fights, because the boss fights in this game are absolutely no joke and they are a ton of fun. I feel like the strongest aspect of this game are the boss fights. These things are crazy and they've got some wicked patterns. They've got some absolutely cruel patterns that feel like way ahead of their time. Personally, they feel like something out of DOJ at times, and other times definitely has that Toplan feel, like the part where it does the quick bullet spreads and everything, like, ah, that's Toplan. There's even a part that it has all these sort of line attacks that reminds me a lot of the tank boss in Dodonpachi, where it has the final section where it shoots all these sort of needles at you. And I wonder, did Cho Ren Sha influence this in any way? Is it a coincidence that both of these have this sort of needle attack? I would really love, at some point, one of my videos I'm going to do is sort of tracking the DNA of Shmup gameplay from studio to studio to see what studios influenced what, like specific things, like who came up with this needle attack or who came up with the concentrated laser. We know who did the concentrated laser, but stuff like that, that'd be really cool. Let's end by talking about the music, because this is something I always forget to mention in my Shmup reviews for some reason. I don't know why. I guess just because I take it for granted that pretty much all the Shmups I talk about tend to have really good music. Cho Ren Sha is no exception. So what can you say about the music? It's really interesting because it has a sort of mixture of vibes at the same time, but they work together well. You know, it's peanut butter and jelly, where it has this really upbeat sort of rhythm section a lot of the time where it's really high energy and feels like, oh, okay, this is a Genesis type of game. This is something you'd play on I guess a Mega Drive or Genesis or PC Engine. It has a really upbeat tempo, but then it brings in the moody organ and everything like that, and I'm a big fan of moody synth organs. That's one of my favorite video game instruments. Reminds me a lot of The Art of Fighting. The Art of Fighting has similar organ music, and I'm guessing the soundtrack was based off of the Sharp sound chip or sound card or whatever was in there. I'm assuming so. In that case, that computer has some really slamming sound equipment in there, because it has a real distinctive feel that you don't quite get anywhere else. And I know it's a very popular soundtrack, and I do know they sold the soundtrack because I used some of the soundtrack art on the thumbnail. And yeah, it's one of those Shmup soundtracks where if you have a Shmup music collection, I would consider it pretty important to include, because it's one of those that's, again, very influential in itself. Not only the visuals of the game, not only the gameplay, not only the power-up system, but also the fact that I think the music is influential as well. So that's everything I have to say about Cho Ren Sha. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Thanks again for the patrons supporting the channel. It means a lot to me. It definitely goes a long way in helping me feel motivated and creating content and feeling like, oh, okay, people actually care about what I'm doing. So thanks so much. And I need to start ending these videos by asking people to subscribe, like, everything like that. The reason why that's important is because I found, doing some research and just following my own channel's growth, that the strongest method of this channel to get bigger isn't, you know, hitting people up on Twitter. It isn't necessarily collabing with other bigger YouTubers. Tried that didn't really go anywhere. It isn't using the forum. It isn't using Reddit. Those do help, but what brings in the most new people, what brings in the most views, what brings in the most growth for the channel is attacking that YouTube algorithm, getting in there, planting my virus within the system, and getting the Electric Underground to show up on other people's videos. They're watching My Life in Gaming or something, and bam, the Electric Underground appears. That is the best way for this channel to grow. So the liking, the subscribing, the watching the whole video, all that stuff really helps. And so I need to sort of remind people about that at the end of the videos a little bit more. Adios, everyone. So thank you to 72 PCT Water, Adam Pearson, Adrian Reyes, Ukshay Wadker, Dingo, Andy Cap, Another Joe, Anthony A, Ben Wynn, Borgate22, Brian Reboot, Brian Shiver, Corio, Danielle Savage, Delta Tango 6, Disco Stas Leia, Dominic NG, Eric H, Full Set, Retro Shmupper, Geriatric Donmaku, Hausu, Ilya, Kiwi, JLab, JB RPG, Joe Angelo, Gameboy Guru, K, K2, Kikoman589, Larridge, Malaise, Mark Toms, Maz, Meher Calendrian, Minong, Queen Charlene, Nathaniel Davis, and Electron, Neon Dagger Games, Okla Googles, Philip Mason, Portal63, Raul, Realskeen, Sketcher Raccoon, SLW, The Boot Rex, TRM, Sugumo, Yishi, Plasmo, and Utakaya. Thanks for watching.